So welcome everyone. It's Wednesday afternoon, our last day of September, and we're diving into October and fall. Even if it doesn't feel like fall, we're in fall. We're going to start today talking about our virtual children. So we should have raised them through age 5 at this point. I'm going to share my screen real quick so that you can see, and you remember you're probably going to have to take a picture of these questions because they might fade away as we break into groups. But you might notice some things changing about the quality of your marriage relationship in your virtual simulation. So I know in my other class, there's already at least a few people that have been divorced or had some marriage problems that have risen as they have tiny children, and that can be a very stressful time in one's marriage when children are small and they need a lot from both parents. So let us know if maybe you have financial stresses in your marriage in the virtual simulation, or maybe you already know you're divorced, or it could have prompted you to decide whether you might think about going to counseling. That's also a common prompt within the simulation. By the end, it is the case that 50% of you will have been divorced, so it should reflect normal statistics that we see in the US with about a 50% or 49%, I think is the exact percentage of the divorce rate in our country. So also I want you to share, like, how is your child's language developing, their problem solving skills, their motor skills, social skills? Are they getting along with other kids? Are they being aggressive? That's a pattern that tends to be fairly common at this time. Are they having trouble sharing, for example, or do they feel shy? What's kind of going on socially with your specific kid? And then let's see what else we got here. Have you and your partner had another child? So I think over half of you guys will have at least 2 children in this simulation. With that new child, how has your oldest or focal child changed? Have they become jealous, or are they really helpful? I know, for example, my niece became really aggressive when her little brother was born, and she would be mean to whoever was holding her little brother. So this is not too uncommon because, again, parents' attention is now divided between 2 children instead of just 1, and the oldest child can really have a hard time with that. Do you feel your child is ready to enter kindergarten? Why or why not? What has your simulation told you about the skills your child has that might indicate that they're ready or they're not quite entirely ready yet? So with that said, I'm going to break us into some groups. I'm just going to pause let's see.
You're muted, Dr. Flores.
Thanks for reminding me. I'm just starting to record again. It was really nice to kind of hear some of your experiences, especially that, you know, there's many of you who might be separated or at least having some tension with your partner. We talked about that in a couple of different groups. So it's very interesting. Are there any reasons why you think maybe your child isn't ready for kindergarten yet? Did you guys get to that last question? Any thoughts?
For me, my virtual child is having a hard time with his language skills. Like he's having a hard time, like, I think it's been recognizing letters and words and just like talking in general. So his other skills, like his motor and his social skills are great, but his language skills are like below average. So
that's interesting. I think, yeah, Caroline, a lot of what you're talking about are emergent literacy skills, which we'll either get to today or on Monday talking about in this chapter. And those tend to precede their ability to be able to read. And so those early skills are kind of an indication of whether they're ready for kindergarten or not. So I think that's really perceptive of you to pick up on that. Anything else that children are struggling with, maybe indicating that they're not quite ready for kindergarten yet?
I had kind of the opposite experience. I really focused on language and cognitive development with my child in the beginning, and not so much the more social aspect of it. So
Uh-huh.
she very developed and ahead for all of her like language development and math and science skills and things like that. And that's what she seems to be very drawn to. However, in the reports, it does say that she has a little bit of a problem with the other kids at school. Like she just doesn't get along with them very well. So I think that I like kind of messed up in the sense of not giving her more social time. So I've been making sure to do that a lot more, like when I can. I think that's the only thing that would be like holding her back from like doing very well in kindergarten right now.
And is your daughter an only child or no?
No, she's not. And at first she did not get along with her brother, and now she gets along with him really well. And she's in a very independent stage where all she wants to do is just like figure things out for herself and doesn't want me
Your
or like
input.
her dad or anybody to bother her.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting. They have these virtual children have such personalities, and sometimes you don't anticipate the challenges you might have because you may or may not have had those challenges as a small child yourself, right? It can be really easy when a child emulates similar challenges that you had because you might know what to do for them. But when they're quite different, it might be hard for you to navigate that challenge. So, thank you so much for sharing. We're going to dive into this chapter. So I'm going to share my screen with you all. And I got to get out of this. Okay. All right. And that is not the actual slide I want to be on. Let me see what it does here. Okay. So now from this point forward with our textbook, it's going to talk about physical and cognitive development in one chapter for that stage of development, and then social and emotional development in the second chapter for that stage. So instead of having 3 separate chapters for each stage, we'll just have 2. So we're going to focus on both physical growth and like how they're mentally thinking quite differently at this stage in early childhood, which is roughly from age 3 to 6. And I want to also just highlight the fact that, we're really thinking about development right now in a normal world in this chapter, but this is likely a really challenging time of life for parents right now who are experiencing COVID, and they may not be able to send their children to daycare or preschool or kindergarten, or if they do and it's virtual, they don't have the attention spans to really engage at the level that is required virtually. So this can be for, I think, myself, from my opinion, I think it might be the most challenging stage of development to be parenting right now. If you have a child at home right now that's this age, because you might be juggling work and they require a lot more attention and time, and it might be really, really challenging for these parents making decisions to perhaps homeschool while they're also working full time. So just something to think about during this stage while we talk through it. So their growth, similar to toddlerhood, it's slowing again. They're still growing, but it isn't as fast of a rate as it was during toddlerhood. And their proportions are shifting. So their head, again, isn't as large of a proportion of their total body. So their body starts to look more similar to an adult-like body in the sense that their head isn't such a large proportion of their body. And they start to thin out. And a lot of parents will comment that they no longer have a baby anymore, that they actually have a little boy or a little girl, because they start to more look like their particular gender, whatever that may be. And if there's differences in size, they become much more apparent at this stage. So I was a very small, I'm still a very small adult, but I was always really tiny and petite at this stage. And if you're going to be a taller person, then that becomes a little bit more evident during early childhood as well. Other things that change are that their posture and balance improves. And in a few slides, when we talk about motor development changing, we learn that their cerebellum, which is the tiny brain near the rear of their head, this tiny brain called the cerebellum helps improve our balance and coordination at this stage of early childhood because it's becoming further myelinated, meaning that the axons in those neurons have more myelination or fatty tissue, increasing the signal, which helps make their motor movement much more smooth and adult-like in nature. Another thing that's happening with their skeletal growth is epiphyses emerge. Epiphyses are kind of the knobby end of our bones. Before this point in time, the bones seem to be very, they don't have that knobby ending that we see depicted in skeletons around Halloween time. Instead, it's just like I guess, a tube-like shape without the knobs at the end. The other thing that happens is that little children near the end of early childhood begin to lose their baby teeth. So it's really important for parents to start to prioritize dental care during early childhood once children start to enter kindergarten, for example, because once they lose those baby teeth, not brushing their teeth or not having a regular habit of brushing twice a day will result in damage to their permanent teeth. So this is something to keep in mind as a parent to be vigilant about. Another thing that's happening at this point is that they show a distinct preference for the use of their right or left hand, which we call handedness. In the world, 90% of the population tends to be right-handed, which means that their language is organized predominantly in their left hemisphere of the brain. Keep in mind that when you do anything with the right side of your body, it's processed contralaterally or in the other hemisphere of the brain. So 90% of people actually are right-handed, 10% are left-handed. It's much less common, but one thing that's interesting to know is that lefties actually are disproportionately represented in the Nobel Prize winners, and also American presidents are disproportionately lefties. So there's something unique about the organization of the brain in left-handed individuals. They actually use both hemispheres of their brain sorry, I'm looking for the word. When they're speaking or understanding language, both sides of their brain are activated, not just the left hemisphere. So this unusual organization of not just language, but many different skills may be responsible for, perhaps some unusual level of brilliance among left-handed individuals. And how do we become handed in the right or the left hand? Well, there's evidence of both nature and nurture influencing this. So first I want to talk about when the baby is still in their mom's stomach. They're oftentimes positioned with their head down, and they have more freedom to manipulate the environment of the womb with their right hand. So they get this practice of exploring in the stomach with their right hand. And that practice from early on actually can lend them to have this preference for right-handedness. Now, not all children are positioned the same way in the womb. We've talked about the breech position, for example. So it is the case for some children that they don't have this freedom with their right hand. They might be exploring their environment more so with their left hand, which could play a part in them preferring their left hand. But we also do know that parents who are left-handed, or at least one of the parents is left-handed, they have a higher likelihood of having a child who's left-handed as well. So there seems to be some responsibility for both nature and nurture in dictating whether a child will be right-handed or left-handed. So it's kind of a complicated thing. At early childhood, again, they're preferring to use a right or left hand to write with. But before this, we see it in what hand they choose to eat with or brush their teeth with. If you've ever tried to like brush your teeth with your other hand that you don't often use, it's a really awkward process. So this seems to be something that we allocate very early on, or we designate in our brain which hand is going to be responsible for these more complex fine motor movements. So other things that are happening with the brain, I've already kind of mentioned some of them, but the brain is, during early childhood, we're decreasing the amount of synapses throughout the brain. Remember, our brain is pruning those synapses that we're not using anymore. And again, there's many different parts of the brain that are becoming more myelinated or more efficient in their function. And so that myelination is going to, again, speed up the communication between neurons within that part of the brain. So both of these things are happening simultaneously during early childhood. One part of the brain that is becoming more effective in its processing is the amygdala. Amygdala is Greek for the word almond. So these two almond-shaped parts of our brain that are subcortical underneath our cerebral cortex, and they process new things that we encounter, things that are novel, and also emotional information. So they kind of taste incoming emotional content and determine, should they be afraid of something? Do they prefer something? Does something make them happy? All of that activation happens in the amygdala when you're encountering kind of emotionally laden content. So we see here in this image over to the right, there's like a little orange kind of almond hiding behind the hippocampus there. And that's, again, we have two of them within our brain, one in each hemisphere, but it's going to be responsible for processing emotional information. The cerebellum I mentioned in the back, that tiny brain, it actually looks like a smaller version of the larger brain, right? It's evolutionarily speaking the oldest part of our brain. So even like before the Homo sapiens existed, earlier versions of our species still had a very similar cerebellum as part of their brain. It's critical for us to be able to balance and move around in a smooth, like agile fashion. So it's really responsible for body movement and balance. And the reason why, again, it's becoming more, children during early childhood are becoming better at their movement is because of the myelination that's happening in the cerebellum. Lastly, we have the hippocampus, and this is a really interesting thing that's happening during this early childhood stage. The hippocampus is largely known to be responsible for creating memories and also helping us find our way through spaces, to navigate spaces. We kind of have to have a memory of a space in order to remember how to get to where we need to go. So these two things are very interrelated, memory and navigational skills. One thing that's interesting is that before age 3, we don't really have many memories that we can recall from being an infant or being a toddler. It's really, really rare that people have detailed memories. They might have some memories that could have been dreams. That's also possible, but a lot of this is attributed to the concept of infantile amnesia, such that people just don't have a lot of detailed memories before age 3. Age 3 or 4 is kind of when we start to create more meaningful, detailed memories because we have better language skills at this point in time. We can speak in complex sentences, and most of our memories are coded linguistically. So before we have complex language, it's really hard to recall details from our earlier development. But also, you know, our hippocampus is not very well myelinated. Okay, good question, Madeline. Is the cerebellum related to vertigo? My guess would be yes. That if you are experiencing vertigo where you aren't able to like stand or sit upright because you have this strange sense of like you might get nauseous from being upright, for example. Something might be affecting your balance specifically. But I don't, I'm not a doctor in that sense. Like I'm not a medical doctor, so I don't want to.
Yeah, is it located on the back of your neck, like your back of your head, sort of upper neck?
Yeah. It's just below your occipital lobe.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I get vertigo when I sleep, and so it happens when it's pinched like with a pillow, like if my head's tilted at a certain place. So that's like, yeah, that's really interesting.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's weird how I know I've had vertigo before. I was like,
oh, it's terrible.
started to kind of go sideways, and I had a chiropractor use magnets to. Have you ever had that?
No, I haven't, but I know there's exercises to do for your neck, but that makes a lot of sense because I've always wondered why, like, my neck being bent a certain way, why I have to have like a certain pillow, because of my cerebellum is like probably being, the nerves are
crunched or something.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Huh. Yeah, I have a special pillow too, but I think that has to do with the neck injury I had, but maybe that also contributed to occasional experiences of vertigo, because it's all located right underneath there. So there you go. Learn something new every day. I want to just finish my thought with the infantile amnesia first. We really don't think too much about things that have happened to us during infancy or early toddlerhood, again, because we don't have the language skills to code those memories properly, and our hippocampus is not myelinated enough for us to maybe store and retrieve those memories from long-term memory in a meaningful way. Some other things that are happening with physical growth during this period of time is that our pituitary gland within our brain releases two different types of hormones that initiate growth for us. The first one is the growth hormone, or GH. This is the hormone that's necessary for all body tissue development. So all the cells within our body are, they divide, multiply, and that's all triggered from this GH hormone. The only things that aren't furthered in maturation by the GH hormone are our central nervous system, meaning our brain and our spinal cord, and also our genitals. So, these two things aren't initiated or changed by the growth hormone, but the thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH, does allow for normal brain growth during this period of time. So it is initiating that synaptic pruning we talked about earlier, and also the myelination of all these different parts of the brain to help it be more efficient. That's the TSH that's responsible for that. Note that, the hormones responsible for triggering changes in the genitals are not important at this point in time, of course, because the children are not going through puberty during early childhood. So we're not talking about this and about that particularly in this chapter. Okay, so I've already alluded a little bit to the fact that with the myelination of the cerebellum, children in early childhood have better gross motor skills. So just like toddlers, they're walking and running, but they're doing so in a smoother way. They look less clumsy when they're moving around. And they're jumping just like toddlers can jump, but they're doing it in maybe a more intentional, agile type of way. They're able to use hand-eye coordination to catch balls and throw them. They're swinging on a swing at the playground is quite complex because you have to shift your body weight forward and backwards and pump your legs at the same time, knowing when to do that. It takes a while for a child to be able to coordinate that, and the maturation of the cerebellum can help assist with that. Riding a bicycle is also really, really common to learn around age 5, which is within early childhood. I don't know if you've ever tried to teach anybody how to ride a bike. But it is quite complicated because they have to have a fair amount of balance. So that should make you think cerebellum. And to not use the training wheels, right? And also to not be afraid to keep pedaling forward when their balance might seem a little uncertain. So it takes some time. I've taught one of my best friends when he was around 30 how to ride a bike. Really complicated in a parking lot, let me tell you, like, especially because I was shorter than him. So, you know, trying not to have him fall on top of me while we're in this sweaty parking lot, trying to teach him how to do this. It's quite easier to do this with a young child when you can easily, you know, push them forward because they don't weigh as much, and help them stop if they need to, and kind of run alongside them to help them feel more safe as they're learning this skill. So their balance is improving, which would allow them to actually ride a bike. And they don't look as clumsy walking and running as they did as a toddler. They'll make less mistakes. Remember, during toddlerhood, they're kind of built to be able to fall and bruise themselves because they have this very hard, sturdy head in relation to the rest of their body that's a little bit doughier. Now, as they've thinned out and grown a little taller, luckily their coordination has improved so that they fall less during early childhood. Their upper and lower body skills combine to, again, just create more refined actions by the age of 5. So they can start to participate in extracurriculars like soccer and martial arts and dance, because they can learn more complex coordinated movements. And they're faster, and they also have greater stamina. So think about children at recess during like kindergarten, for example. They really do need that time to run around and tire themselves out so that they can return to the classroom and be able to focus. They have a lot of energy to burn. So this is something that helps make them faster and be able to move around for a longer period of time. With their fine motor skills, the biggest thing that they are accomplishing during this period by around age 5 is being able to tie a shoe. This is usually a requirement of a kindergarten teacher. They'll ask parents to stop sending their kids to school with Velcro shoes so that the child has to practice tying their shoe over and over again. Obviously, it requires a lot of fine movement of the fingers, so it takes a while for them to learn this multi-step process and how to move and coordinate their fingers to accomplish that. Dressing, eating, or feeding themselves is also a more complex fine motor sequence of events that they're learning at this stage. And they begin to draw. So in their drawing, what we see on the image to the left are what we call tadpole people. You might remember creating images like this where your legs shoot outside of the head, and then maybe you have arms, maybe you don't. If the arms exist, they might come outside of the head or spring from the legs themselves. This is a really common beginning point for trying to represent human form early on in early childhood. By the end of early childhood, different features such as integrating the existence of a torso on a body, or specific features like more detailed eyes, nose, mouth, fingers come into existence. If you're drawing animals, they'll have all the different body parts like the torso, the legs, the tail, that they might have lacked in the tadpole form, okay? So what's interesting about this is, culturally speaking, this progresses at this very average pace for within our culture. In other cultures like China, where they have a very detailed curriculum for drawing, children learn these skills earlier because it is a priority within that culture to teach these skills necessary to be a more skilled artist, which is not as big of a priority within our culture. So we do know that with some training, children can acquire more detail in their drawings earlier than 5 or 6, but it would have to be a priority within the curriculum of a school. So we're still focusing on physical growth in this slide. We're going to talk about nutrition in early childhood. I don't know about you guys, but I was a super picky eater. Was anyone else like kind of just eating one or two things at this age? I'm curious to hear from you guys. I know for me, it was like cheese and bologna sandwiches. That sounds like totally disgusting, but that was my go-to as a like 4 or 5-year-old. Checking into our chat. Carrots, apples, and canned peaches. Well, that sounds pretty healthy, Ryan. Nausea ate everything. Let's see. Chicken strips. Oh yeah, I was a huge chicken strip fan with honey mustard. So some of us weren't very picky. Bagel and lox. Wow, that's impressive. Everything but fish. So a lot of these are quite simple foods like chicken noodle soup, applesauce, chicken strips. They don't have too complex of a flavor palette. Some of you might have just been exposed to a wider variety of foods like I see olive and mayo sandwiches. Yeah, very bland foods, right? Because our taste buds during this stage are quite sensitive, and we don't really like complex tastes like blue cheese, for example, or let's see, what's another, like fish, sardines, those kinds of more complex flavors are less preferred by preschoolers. So our appetite also declines a bit as we become thinner during early childhood. Unfortunately, if we are really picky eaters and we are resistant to trying new things, this can affect our immune system. So we might be sick more frequently. This is also coinciding at the same time that we start to be around our peers more often. So they might be bringing germs with them to school. And if we don't have a balanced diet, then we're more likely to get sick. So I'm just looking at the chat because we have a couple things going on. So I like the question, Elma, wouldn't this vary from culture to culture? I had to eat more dishes from my family's homeland. Yeah, so because we tend to prefer the types of food that we're exposed to, a lot of people think children only eat like hot dogs and chicken nuggets and pizza. Well, that has to do with the parents' mentality that that's all their child will eat. But instead, if they approach it with the idea that their child needs a balanced diet, and expose them to a lot of different types of nutritious foods, their child's more likely to prefer the foods that you expose them to. So that could be really specific and regional to, what is more common to eat in your culture. And also, in the United States, there's so many different types of cuisine that you could expose your child to ensure that they're eating a nutritious, balanced diet. But certainly children do start to become wary of new foods that you introduce them to. They don't like that suspicious looking vegetable or fruit that you put on their plate. And if you don't stress them out too much and just say, okay, you're gonna try everything once, you don't have to eat the whole thing, but the rule is just to try everything once, then they're more likely to have a varied palate if you encourage them to try everything just once. Wow, you didn't know what burgers were until you were 5. That's impressive. Yeah, that has a lot to do with exposure, right? What kinds of foods might you have been exposed to that we didn't eat because it was common within your family? All right, a lot of rice and ketchup. Hey, we all survived, right? We all survived early childhood, but a lot of us were quite picky. You do need a higher quality diet at this stage of development than before. So in toddlerhood and infancy, we really emphasize a high fat diet. This is when the proportion of fat in your diet can start to fall off a little bit. So you want, as a parent, to begin limiting the amounts of fats, oils, salt, and sugar that you expose your child to in early childhood. You want them to also be eating more similar meals that you yourself eat. So this requires you as an adult to model healthy eating choices. which not every parent has the best diet themselves. So this might reflect in the types of foods that your young child is preferring because you yourself model eating those same foods. A poor quality diet is associated with children having some cognitive deficits, especially with attention. They might have a shorter attention span or act out and be aggressive. So we do know that children who have early symptoms of perhaps ADHD, making some changes to diet can be really helpful for that child. Limiting sugars and certain preservatives that can not be metabolized properly by young children will really help reduce the amount of symptoms they exhibit with ADHD. So always being mindful. It's scary now. If anyone's ever tried to go off of sugar, you start to realize that it's in everything. If you look at the ingredients on different packages, it's like, why did they put sugar in salsa? I have no idea, but they did. So being mindful of that and maybe figuring out a new diet for your child can be really helpful so that they don't experience the social ramifications of exhibiting a lot of these ADHD symptoms. All right, I'm just checking our time. We're on a good pace here. I won't say too much on this slide because I know all of you have already written about this topic, so I'll just touch on a few things. We're still in physical development at this point in time in the chapter. So a lot of children in the US are not getting all their vaccinations, also known as immunizations, to help support their immune system fighting off diseases and viruses that potentially could threaten their lives. One reason is just simply cost. Families might not have access or health care to be able to afford these vaccinations. So that could be one thing that could limit or prohibit a child from gaining access to these immunizations. Also, and a lot of you didn't really think about this per se in your papers, but I've had a lot of friends tell me how stressful it is to go to the pediatrician every month or every few weeks when you have a very full schedule, perhaps with taking your child to daycare or preschool, and you yourself are working full time. So it can be a little stressful to make sure that you make it to the pediatrician for all these vaccinations because there's a lot of them. So that's one excuse for some parents not being able to maybe do it in time or be delayed in getting the immunizations their child needs. In your papers, you talked extensively about, parents' beliefs that immunizations can cause autism, they can cause all these different things that we know are not true, but there is a very specific reason why people believe that. We all looked at Andrew Wakefield's article, which is depicted right here, that had to be retracted. And a lot of you discussed in your papers how parents are scared that the mercury or aluminum in vaccines could cause different conditions in children or perhaps make them sick. And many of you also argued that there's such a negligible amount of these different toxins that it couldn't possibly cause these different neurological disorders such as autism. So there was that back and forth in a lot of your papers. I'm going to go back for a second. The last bullet point is that parents may practice a religion that prohibits them from giving their children vaccines. So they may decide, they're not going to give their child a vaccine because it goes against their religious beliefs. I believe the one religion I'm aware of that does not, I guess there's a couple of them now I'm thinking of, I think Jehovah's Witness may be one of them. Scientology may be a second one. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe in both of those religions, there is a resistance to medical interventions, not just in the form of vaccines, but also near the end of life, not to allow for, different medical interventions that would extend one's life. Okay, so now we're transitioning into cognitive development. So it is only appropriate that we would be talking about Piaget's cognitive developmental theory. And during this stage, early childhood, children are within the pre-operational stage in his theory. So in his theory, this spans from age 2 to 7, so a little bit longer than the early childhood phase. But during this time, Piaget says that children begin to play make-believe more often, and they're able to mentally represent some real life situations they've observed perhaps in person or through a TV show, and pretend to play out different roles in their make-believe play. So I always like to hear from you guys, because I know that we were all pretty creative as young children in early childhood. One common make-believe scenario that me and my siblings acted out a lot was we watched the movie Swiss Family Robinson. I don't know if it's too old for you guys to have seen it, but when we played outside, because we played outside a lot, we would bring bowls and stuff out and collect plants and make believe meals out of different plants around the neighborhood, and pretend like we were, you know, existing on the earth or just subsisting from different plants around us, and pretend that we were the Swiss family. I'm curious to you, I like some of these already have chimed in. Believing that everything on the floor is lava and jumping from sofa to sofa. Yes, this is again a great form of make-believe play. I think I did that for quite a while as a kid. I don't know that my parents loved it, but definitely did that. What are some other things that you guys did for make-believe play? You pretended to be in the show from Happy Days. That's funny. Just checking our chat. Playing house, very common, right? Someone had to be the child and other people had to be the parents. If you were an older sibling, you usually got to be who you want it to be, right? Freeze tag, ooh, Harry Potter and Pirates. We played Neverland, like pretending that you were flying around like with Peter Pan. Hannah Montana, coming from the TV shows, all right. Being spies. Runway shows, that's funny. So I'm just checking through here. A lot of different things originating from TV shows or movies. Pretending to be a singer. I thought I was Vin Diesel, that's pretty funny. So yeah, we can mentally, we don't need to have a really specific costume, right? Or props, because in make-believe, even the most basic, you know, item can turn into something else. We can pretend it's something else. So this make-believe play is something that is very rich among, you know, all stages of socioeconomic status. It's not limited by our access to certain kinds of toys. So yeah, a lot of people playing store, wanting a cash register. Thanks for sharing, guys. These are all great examples. Indiana Jones. I enjoyed that show too, the movies, several movies. Okay, so what I want to turn to is the fact that we have symbol to real world relations. We're able to, in the case of this child over to the right, he's kind of pretending to be an astronaut or out in space, and you know, there's planes that are maybe flying around down below him, but we create our own world. I know a lot of people in my last class shared, for example, playing with figurines or Barbies in this whole alternate world that they had going. And I remember as a kid, like we would lay out kind of like towels, almost like a blueprint of a house, and you know, play Barbies in the different spaces and have a whole neighborhood. We made a huge mess, I remember, at my friend's house, but her parents allowed us to do this. So yeah, it's something where you're trying to represent in your own make-believe world something that exists in real life, or maybe, you know, existed in a movie, for example. Some things that are limitations of thinking at this period of time, according to Piaget, he said children are still very egocentric, which we're gonna look at a video of what it means to be egocentric early in early childhood. They may lack conservation until the end of early childhood. And another thing that we'll talk about in future slides are that they lack generally this hierarchical classification of objects. So they might not be able to conceptualize, for example, that lilies and tulips and roses, they're all flowers. They all are within this hierarchy of flowers. Flowers is the larger category that organizes them all. So sometimes we don't make that connection across different categories as easily during early childhood. Just gonna check our chat because I feel like there's a lot going on. You guys are funny. All right. So with egocentrism, there was a really common paradigm or experiment that Piaget would conduct with children ranging from age 2 to 7, which is that he would, this child in front of the table here on the right is standing in front of a mountain scene, but her view of that scene is distinct and different from the doll on the opposite side of the table. The problem, though, within early childhood at the beginning is that that child believes that the doll has the same perspective as them. So if they had to identify a picture of what the doll is seeing, they would identify a picture that actually shows the same exact viewpoint that they have on the opposite side of the table. They don't really distinguish their viewpoint from other people. They think everyone has the same amount of knowledge, everyone has the same beliefs. So what I'm going to show you in this video is called a false belief task, and you'll see how children progress from early childhood not being very, very egocentric to later in early childhood when they understand that you and I have different, distinct, unique perspectives. We don't have all the same knowledge or the same beliefs. So I'm going to show you this and see what you think about the difference. There's kind of like a switch that flips for children across around age 4 in the middle of early childhood.
Is to serve up fresh, and the last thing you want is to run out.
You're gonna have a tea party with Play-Doh. I wanna serve myself. Here, Sarah. No!
Well, you've probably discovered that however smart your 3-year-old is, she doesn't seem able to put herself in someone else's mental shoes, to imagine how they think and what they believe. Perhaps you thought your parenting skills were to blame, but scientists suggest that understanding other minds is a skill that may not be fully developed until a child is about 4. To learn how children's social skills evolve between about 3 and 4, researchers use something called a false belief test.
What do you think's in this box? Looks fairly obvious, doesn't it? Crayons. But let me show you. I filled it full of candles. All right, now I close it up again. While you and I have been having this conversation, Snoopy has been down here asleep. Doesn't know what we've talked about. But let's bring him into the conversation. Now I have another question for you. What do you think Snoopy will say if I ask him what's in this box? Crayons, obviously. What else could anybody possibly say? Well, watch this 3-year-old.
What do you think is inside this box? Okay, let's open it up and see.
Candles.
Now, you can ask the child what appears to be a very simple question about that. What did you think was inside the box when you first saw it? They say, oh, I always thought that there were candles in this box. Then you can ask them about someone else. So you can ask them about Snoopy. Snoopy's been sitting here. He hasn't seen this box. He's never seen us open it up. What does Snoopy think is inside this box?
Candles.
Children say the same thing. Snoopy will think there are candles inside of this box. And what that indicates is that the children's view of how minds work is very, very different from the view that you and I would have. Yes. Did you see it?
In the mind of the 3-year-old, everyone sees the world much the same way. there's no difference between what I think and believe and what everyone else, including Snoopy, thinks and believes. It is, in a sense, a naive and innocent view of the world, a kind of mental Eden. And then, about 4, comes the fall from grace.
Now, if you take a 4-year-old, quite typically the 4-year-old will tell you that, as a matter of fact, he thought there were crayons in the box, and then he found out that there were candles in the box. You can ask him about Snoopy, and he'll say, oh no, Snoopy will think that there are crayons in this box. Great, why will he think that?
Because it's a crayon box.
That's right, and that's going to make him think they're crayons. What's really in the box?
Candles.
Right. And then you get the 5-year-olds who are just utterly blasé and think that this is such an obvious thing, it's silly even to ask the question. What that shows is that by the time children are 4 and 5, they have a view of the mind that looks much more like our view of the mind. They understand that things can be tricky and deceptive, that you can change your mind, that things aren't always the way that they seem. And that gives them a very different vision of how the mind works and how people work.
Remember, we're sharing this. Well, I need that. And then it's my turn.
Children who pass the false belief test now understand that other people can have different beliefs, even mistaken beliefs. Some scientists suggest that this test is further evidence of innate brain circuits specialized for reading other people's minds. They call it a theory of mind mechanism.
All right, let me get back to our lecture because he says something there at the end of his video that is really key. Having theory of mind is understanding that you and I have distinct, unique perspectives. And theory of mind really starts to evolve during this stage of early childhood. There are one population of children who have a lag in theory of mind. They have a specific diagnosis where it takes them longer to come to the realization that you and I have unique and different perspectives. They stay in this more egocentric perspective for a longer time. Does anybody want to guess what child might have a lag in the development of theory of mind, or they don't understand that we have 2 distinctly different perspectives? Any thoughts? I'll give you a hint that these children also have delays in language development as well. Okay, perfect. Yeah, a child who has autistic spectrum disorder or autism, they have a harder time coming to the realization. They live in this egocentric perspective for a much longer time than a normally developing child. So not only would this child have a delay in their language development, but also they might not understand by the end of early childhood that you and I have different perspectives, that not everyone has the same knowledge or the same beliefs. So that's something really unique to individuals who are on the spectrum of autism. So this is, of course, being egocentric at the beginning of early childhood is related to, performing poorly on these false belief tasks that we saw exemplified in that video, and not having theory of mind yet. So theory of mind comes, or it emerges as you begin to identify that you and I may have different beliefs or different perspectives of the same exact situation. So another thing that Piaget suggested is difficult at the beginning of early childhood is conservation, which is depicted in this image over to the left. We're actually going to see a video of a child and a researcher who is testing this young child on conservation tasks. So I'll come back to centration and irreversibility after we see the video. I want you to just see, because it's interesting, this child is very verbal and very aware, but still has a lot of challenges and does not understand conservation at all. For example, one of the early tasks that the researcher does with this child is simply spacing out quarters, like you see pennies spaced out on the top line here. And the child will say, well, there's more pennies in the top row than the bottom row because they're all stretched out. But he gives really specific reasons why he has this inability to understand conservation. So hang tight as I pull up this video.
There is a huge fundraising deadline coming up for Senate Democrats, and they need your help.
Quarters. Okay. Does this row have more quarters? Does this row have more quarters, or are they the same?
The same.
The same? Okay, now watch. Now, does this row have more quarters? Does this row have more quarters, or are they the same?
That one has more quarters.
That one has more quarters?
Yeah.
Why does that one have more quarters?
Because it's stretched out.
Because it's stretched out?
Yes.
Okay, so how many are in this row?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, how many are in this row?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
So, are there more in this row, or are they the same?
The same.
The same?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so we have 2 sticks. Is this stick longer? Is this stick longer, or are they the same?
The same.
The same? What about now? Is this stick longer? Is this stick longer, or are they the same?
That stick is longer.
The stick is longer?
Yeah.
Can you tell me why?
Because you moved it over.
So now it's longer.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me. I'm gonna pour blue water into each of these cups, and you're gonna have to tell me when they have the same amount, okay? Okay, tell me when this one is the same.
The same.
The same? Those 2 are the same now?
Yeah.
Okay. They're the same? Good?
The way did the same. Huh?
Good. Okay, now watch this. We're gonna take the blue water from this glass, and we're gonna pour it into this glass. Now, does this glass have more water? Does this glass have more water, or are they the same?
Has more water.
This one has more water?
Yeah.
Can you tell me why?
Because that one's higher than that one.
That one's higher than that one. Right. Can you tell me, does this ball have more Play-Doh? Does this ball have more Play-Doh, or are they the same?
That one has more Play-Doh.
That one has more?
Yeah.
Let's try and make them the same. Make them 2 of the same size. What about now?
They're the same.
They're the same now?
Yeah.
Okay, now watch. Now, does this one have more Play-Doh? Does this one have more Play-Doh, or are they the same?
That one has more Play-Doh.
That one has more Play-Doh? Can you tell me why?
You smushed that one.
Because that one's smushed. How about now? Does this one have more Play-Doh? Does this one have more Play-Doh, or are they the same?
The same.
Now they're the same. Why are they the same?
You roll that one back up.
Okay, great. Okay. Did we share the graham crackers fair? Is this fair?
Yes.
Yes? Can you tell me why it's fair?
Yeah, what did I do?
I have 1?
You have 2 and I have 1.
Is that fair?
No.
No? How about now?
Now that's fair.
Now that's fair? Why is that fair?
You have 2 and I have 2.
Yeah.
Electric, kinetic. Tell me, can you feel my energy?
Okay, I'm pulling up our lecture again. So hopefully you guys got a little bit of a chuckle out of that child's inability to conserve. But the thing that he's having difficulty with are 2 different items he has to overcome in order to be able to master conservation. The first is that he only centers on one aspect of the problem. So even in that last task where he only has one cracker and she has two of them, he only focuses on the amount, not the size, right? So he's centered on only one feature. If he could focus on more than one feature, he would be able to say, it's still not fair. You have two larger pieces, I have two smaller pieces, right? But he's only centered on amounts. So that's one thing that's inhibiting him from being able to conserve. The second thing is that he isn't able to reverse her actions and realize that she's not taking anything away or adding anything in. When we think about the Play-Doh, for example, she has two balls of Play-Doh, then she smashes one down and he says there's more in the tightly packed ball of Play-Doh, because he's only paying attention to height there. That's one feature he's looking at. She doesn't add any more when she puts it into a ball, but he's not reversing her actions forward and backwards. The same thing happens with liquid. So he is really easily tricked by her using a taller, skinnier glass in that situation as well. So these are two things a child has to overcome in early childhood to be able to master conservation. There's other things that are happening with their information processing at this stage in early childhood. So they start to develop a better episodic memory, or the ability to recall and talk about events that happen personally to themselves. A lot of this, again, has to do with the myelination of their hippocampus. The second thing we've already talked a little bit about is the theory of mind. So I'm not going to go too deep into that, but they are able to understand that people have different amount of knowledge. They have different perspectives from their own. So this is something that is a gain in their information processing as a whole in early childhood. And I believe Caroline mentioned earlier her virtual child, I think did she have a lot of these emergent literacy skills or not quite? Those were things that your child didn't understand yet. And that this emergent literacy is not being able to read, but maybe understanding the sounds that certain letters produce, or recognizing letters, understanding how to consume a book, that you start out on one side and you turn the pages from left to right. So we'll talk a little bit more about specifically what skills a child should have before they enter kindergarten, so that they're primed and ready to learn how to read at that point. So for right now, I'm going to dive a little bit into episodic memory before we conclude class today, because we only have about 2 minutes left. Episodic memory are memory for things that happen in our everyday experience. And one type of episodic memory are scripts that we build. So for familiar events that happen, such as going to the grocery store, what is kind of the order of events when we go to the grocery store? What's something we do first?
You make a list of what you're going to go get.
Well, hopefully, right? We don't go into it blind and hungry and just buy everything. So hopefully we make a list. What do we do next?
Yeah, grab a shopping cart with the person sitting.
Grab a shopping cart. Maybe you approach your grocery shopping in a similar way, like you always start out in one area and move your way over to the produce at the end, potentially. What do you do before you leave the grocery store?
You have to pay.
You have to pay, usually get in a line, wait, pay, and then and run. Run away. That's the one thing you could do. Hopefully you're paying for your groceries, and then you load them into your car and go home, right? So this is just a common script. And young kids, they get into the habit of doing these everyday activities with their parents. They kind of know what to anticipate after a little while. We also build more complex scripts. For example, if you think of like going to a wedding, there's, regardless of the religion, there's some, or the lack of religion, there's some commonalities in that experience of attending a wedding. But we'll pick up there when we come back on Monday together because we are at time. So I'll stop sharing. Thank you for all your participation today. Have a great weekend, and maybe take a peek because your second research assignment is due next Friday, not this Friday, but the following. So if you just take a look at it, be ready for questions that you might want to ask on Monday, and we'll look over that together, okay? See you later. Take care. Bye.